To me, it seems like with the miseducation is that we put ourselves, well, we should be like a certain way, but that's not like the way we should be. Like we're kind of like priding ourselves on the wrong things. We're priding ourselves on getting education, getting this job, and getting all these things, but that's not the way we should be. But it just seemed like we're just not where we're supposed to be. Like our thought process is not right. Our education is not the right education.
For me, it's like, reading this book, I feel like a lot of the problems that he listed, we still have today. And I guess the miseducation is not to be developing information so you can overcome these hurdles that we've well known for almost 100 years now, you know? So it's just coming, 10 years later, it's like, what happened? Why are we like, what's going on? Why are we not progressing? That's kind of how I would take it.
So I think the author makes a really distinct point of distinguishing between the Negro being miseducated and uneducated, right? Like miseducation kind of seems to imply that the person is educated, but they're educated in a manner that's not useful to them, or in a manner that's actually a detriment to them and the rest of their race. One of the striking things to me, looking at the book and reading the book as a person that's getting a PhD, right, was the example he gave of the person that wanted to get a darker degree. Of course, they were mispronouncing the word doctorate, solely for the reason of they just needed to get the degree to get the job to be able to be paid more, right? There was no usefulness of it outside of that. They just kind of put themselves through the meat grinder just to be able to advance themselves in terms of status, but also, the emphasis that he put on making sure that there was some application to what was being taught, right? How there were people in multiple disciplines, whether they were teachers or lawyers or preachers that could, by rote, just spout out the things that they learned in school, but it couldn't really apply it or didn't understand the context. And that kind of applied to everything, both practical applications in terms of theology, in terms of the sciences, or even in terms of understanding our own history. If we're not able to understand the applications and implications of it, then we're miseducated. And that kind of seems to persist across time, whether it's in the 1930s when the book was written or now. I don't necessarily see it as overly critical. It's just a candid assessment. And I think that, Carter G. Woodson attacks a lot of these issues a lot more directly than some of the other writers you see. For instance, I think that the miseducation of the Negro, this is my second time going through it as well, pairs really well with the Souls of Black Folks. And I'm just glad to see that, on the reading list as well. Because Woodson and Du Bois address some of the same issues, with the disconnect between the 10th and the mass, right? Or between the educated Negro and the masses. And I think that it was really interesting, and I think really appropriate that you started the discussion with the slide that showed all the class hierarchies in different cultures, right? One thing that I always thought was really interesting is that if you took any of those class hierarchies from any culture, right? But let's just say specifically, just look at the American culture and overlay, right, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So at the bottom, you have your physical needs, right? Safety, security, shelter, food, and water, right? As you get towards the top, you get towards more abstract things like self-fulfillment, actualization, happiness, desire, right? The fundamental disconnect that's there, it seems, and both Du Bois and Woodson seem to agree on this, is that, the 10th or the educated Negro, whatever you want to call them, are operating at that higher level, right, of that hierarchy, both in terms of social standing, in terms of education, and in terms of the security and their actual human needs being provided for, right? So their purpose for being educated is completely different than the education of a member of the mass, right? For them, it's a means of social mobility, right, and of security. And I think Woodson does a really good job of pointing that out without being accusatory. So I don't see it as being an overly critical tone. It's just a very frank and candid assessment.
In chapter 4, education under outside control. So he defines it. Okay, we talked about what it means to be miseducated. Now, I think this quote talking about real education means to inspire people to live more abundantly, to learn to begin with life as they find it, just take it for reality and make it better. But the instruction so far given to Negroes in colleges and universities has worked to the contrary. In most cases, such graduates have merely increased the number of malcontents who offer no program for changing the undesirable conditions about which they complain. One should rely upon protest only when it's supported by a constructive program. This shift that's happening, who's inspiring people, to do this? I look at like Nipsey Hussle. I think that's a real big game changer. His mentality, his hustle, his business mindedness he brought to the game, about getting your masters. And he's doing all types of innovative stuff. He realized he had like a market share, a fan base that was really hardcore, and he's selling like $1,000 albums. So what? He changed the game. You sell a couple of those albums, you came out pretty well. So he's kind of being really innovative. Chapter 10, the loss of vision. So this is a little lengthy, but bear with me. So history shows then that as a result of these unusual forces in the education of the Negro, this misinformation, he easily learns to follow the line of least resistance rather than battle against odds for what real history has shown to be the right course. A mind that remains in the present atmosphere never undergoes sufficient development to experience what is commonly known as thinking. No Negro thus submerged in the ghetto then will have a clear conception of the present status of the race or sufficient foresight to plan for the future, and he drifts so far towards compromise that he loses moral courage. The education of the Negro then becomes a perfect device for control from without. Those who purposely promote it have every reason to rejoice, and Negroes themselves, I don't know what this word is, champion the cause of the oppressor. And then he says, as Frederick Douglass said in 1852, it is vain that we talk of being men. If we do not the work of men, we must become valuable to society and other departments of industry than those servile ones from which we are rapidly being excluded. We must show that we can do as well as they. When we build as well as live in houses, when we can make as well as wear shoes, when we can produce as well as consume wheat, corn, and rye, then we shall become valuable to society.
I was going to say to your question, what is Black America's greatest export? Our dollar. We spend a lot of money on things that are essentially putting money into other people's pockets. And even with the statement that you just made about kind of us supporting our own community or Black businesses hiring Black employees to that effect, it's kind of the same thing when we, again, think about the Black businessman. That people ridicule Lamar Ball because he said, I want to make a tennis shoe. Like, they ridicule him, but people will pay $600 for you. And that only puts money in Adidas' pocket. And that is not a Black business.
Philosophers have long conceded, however, that every man has two educations, that which is given to him and the other, that which he gives himself. Of the two kinds, the latter is by far the more desirable. Indeed, all that is most worthy in man he must work out and conquer for himself. It is that which constitutes our real and best nourishment. What we are merely taught seldom nourishes the mind like that which we teach ourselves.
Well, I guess I kind of want to comment on the importance of public servants. I mean, I really like how he highlighted this in the book. There definitely needs to be like a nourishment factor. I think a lot of times when we think about like education, it's just like information. But I guess kind of like a bit of conditioning and nurturing towards like ideas and stuff like that. I feel like a lot of times too in our community, like ideas get shot down or it's kind of looked at like a long shot or something, but I definitely think that we need to teach, especially like the younger generation and those who are seeking education and trying to utilize it in an innovative way, that it's okay to think like outside the box.
Yeah, it might have even been in this same chapter, CJ's and Zaria, chapter 12, where he said, we need to innovate, not imitate.
Oh, Understand the Negro, chapter 13. The most inviting field for discovery and invention then is the Negro himself. But we realize this now, right? So it's like, the question is, what do we want to create? And then he lays it out, kind of. The question is, can the Negro youth, miseducated by persons who depreciated their efforts, learn to make opportunities for themselves? This is the real problem which the Negro must solve, and he who is not interested in it and makes no effort to solve it is worthless in the present struggle. Yeah, so the portrait of the Negro has seldom been drawn but by the pencil of his oppressors, and the Negro has sat for it in the distorted attitude of slavery.
I feel like what we need to do now for our future is like, when Woodson kind of talks about the race needs workers and not leaders, and specifically, like, you can find this in page 73, when he talks about like if the Negro could have been an idea of leadership and instead stimulate a large number of the race to take a definitive task and sacrifice their time and energy in doing these things efficiently, the race might accomplish something. I feel like sometimes we get caught up in who's the leader instead of like, are they pushing the right cause and stuff? And the reason why I speak about this is because of like, a couple years ago when Ice Cube kind of had that contract for Black America. And I understand he's a rapper, but still though, he brought together great minds to make this, you know, of some validity. And like, I feel like sometimes we tear stuff like that down instead of just saying, okay, well, let's build this up. Well, I see they're not addressing this. Let's add to that. And like, I feel like instead of like criticizing, we should be like actually taking actions like that. Because to make a contract like that of itself and have, you know, some good things in it, like that takes a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of great minds. Like instead of, you know, pushing that to the side and actually taking time to like do things like that and like get people together to do those hard choices, I feel like we can like really accomplish things.
What is capitalism and is it bad? You know, because I'm looking for the Black America to kind of start competing, right? That's what Dr. Colin Anderson talks about. He starts being a competitive group in this race.
Yeah, that to me, that's about supporting your family versus supporting somebody who's not your family. You know, if your mother's making whatever she's making clothes or manufactured goods, there's a certain loyalty, I think, you know, that you buy from your own community because it's your community, it's your family, you know. And that I think is kind of what's missing in a way. That's the old example of the white man's ice being colder. Two people say a white man selling ice on the corner, and a black person selling ice. People go to the white man because they think it's ice. You know, the white man's ice is colder. It's the same ice. So it's a lot of it is identity and identifying with yourself as a black person and seeing some strength in that. And I think that's what gets missed very often.
So I think that helps, like, talking about what is capitalism and understanding economics. It's like, it's exactly, Zaria, like, I thought it was about keeping the Black dollar in the Black community in economic strength. So yeah, it's Tiffany mentioned earlier, our biggest export is that dollar that we have. So if we are coming and having to say like Black Lives Matter or are talking about the inequality going on, it's like, well, what's our money doing? Are we putting our money where our mouth is? And to me, I guess that's what's behind the Black businesses, is that, you know, we're only gonna empower, we can empower ourselves instead of other people that we are saying aren't doing right by us.
I think it does. It means we have to actually start the research and talk about it. And just the question is good, because a lot of us just go on like knee-jerk reaction, right? Not even know what's so. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm saying, like I said, like, okay, so how would you compare the two? Which one is better than the other, and what metrics are you using?
Well, let's just go around and share some final thoughts from the discussion. Russell, you had your hand up. Did you want to go?
Sure. You know, it's interesting. You know, earlier we mentioned, you know,